Welcome to the live stream, everyone that is here. Excuse me, and thanks so much for being here today. We're doing a bit of a truncated one at a special time, actually a new day and time. For those of you that have been watching the Saturday live streams, we're shifting them to Wednesdays. And today we're doing it at a bit of a special time because I had some stuff on my schedule already, but going forward, they will be at 12 p.m. Eastern or 9 a.m. Pacific time. That includes the monthly Lyceums. I did one last month, which of course you can check out right here, or this month, I guess, technically. It's right up here. So you can check that one out. But we're going to be doing these on Wednesdays, mainly because I think that these kind of chats, these kind of live streams, these kind of videos can help you during the middle part of the week. We're at that midweek element. And if the week hasn't quite gone according to plan, maybe it's broken a little bit, hopefully these live streams, whether they're 30 minutes, an hour, what have you, depending on participation and such, they can then help you close out the week strong. So from the last 2 weeks, let's just go over what I've talked about in the last two solo live streams, which incidentally are also going to be solo episodes of the podcast. So we've already heard one of them that came out. It actually came out last week. If you are a subscriber to the podcast, Mark Manson's episode dropped today, so I hope you'll check that out. You can watch the video of it right here as well, the video conversation. Or if you want to check out the audio version of it, of course, you can also do that right here on YouTube as well. But the last conversation that we had, that will be a solo episode as well. So we're going to try to make these essentially as compartmentalized, but also useful in the audio sense as well. So if you are watching this, or if you are listening to this and you see, I'm going to try to make it work for both. So let's go back and talk about the last two live streams. So in the first one, we talked about the fact that, the myth of busyness, that busy is a lie, essentially. And then in the most recent live stream, we built kind of the operating system, like intentional living through TimeCrafting, which is the framework, the approach, even the philosophy that I teach. Themed days, that sort of thing, time theming in general. And then we really focused on the question that separates intention from inertia. Now this time around, what we're going to do is we're going to get into the part that nobody really talks about, and that's what happens when the system just stops. Here, it will stop, by the way. It will totally stop. For everyone, for me, for anyone, even those that you admire that have been talking about this stuff, maybe you've got fellow YouTubers or YouTubers that you admire, it will stop for them as well, which is probably why they're building other systems or tinkering with them or reinvesting in them. That'll happen. And if you've ever had a week where, let's say, your themes went out the window, so if you're following TimeCrafting and something didn't land or it kind of fell apart, maybe your list didn't get touched either in the way that you expected or just didn't get touched at all, or you felt like you've kind of lost your footing, this particular live stream here, this video is for you. So first, let's name what we tend to do when the system breaks. So what do? Well, we blame the system, or we blame ourselves, right? Either way, we go looking for a new tool, a new app, a fresh start. Maybe we grab a new planner. Anything that feels like it's forward motion. But that's not what's needed. What's needed is a clearer read of what actually happened. There's a difference between a broken system and a broken rhythm. Your system, again, if TimeCrafting is what you're following, like your themes, let's say you're using a planner. I've had the Now Your Action planner that's been out before, the Daily Driver. Maybe you're using that. Maybe you're using a bullet journal, whatever you are using. Maybe your check-in cues. Let's say you've got reminders that are setting you off. Those didn't fail. They still happened. They're still there. It's your cadence. Your cadence that's what happened. And cadence, well, unlike a system, it doesn't break permanently. It just pauses. I've talked about pausing before. There's a little short video right here about it. Got to be careful. I don't want to run out of all of my video cards I can insert. But to kind of give you a sense of what cadence isn't consistency. See, consistency is mechanical. That's why I don't like it when people say, be consistent, be consistent. You have to be consistent in a sustainable way. So if anything, you want to do something sustainably, more so than consistently. They can work together, but that's something to consider. So when we're talking about consistency, that mechanical aspect, it's showing up the same way every single time. But what cadence does is it breathes. It accounts for those off days. It accounts for the hard weeks. Maybe you're having a hard week right now. The seasons where kind of that slow momentum, that's all that can happen. It's the only kind that's really available to you. So when cadence breaks, you don't need a new system. You need a return. Here's the tell. If you look at a system and it still makes sense, then the themes, let's say they still reflect your values, the structure, it still fits your life, then the system isn't the problem. Something interrupted the rhythm, disrupted the rhythm, whichever you want to look at it, but there's a cadence issue and not a design issue. So this is where you have to think about the idea of tolerance. Now, I'm not talking about tolerance as what you're willing to tolerate or anything outside of the idea of a range. So tolerance, you can talk about precision, you can talk about accuracy, but then you can talk about tolerance, which is a window, a range, right? Your system has to have enough of that. It has to have enough give. It has to have enough tolerance so that real life, it can happen without the whole thing collapsing. So if missing a theme, like if a daily theme, it feels like blowing a streak, then the system's too tight. And I've been accused of, accused is probably not the right word, but the idea of, Mike, TimeCrafting's really rigid. You have all these daily themes and so on and so forth. I'm like, but I like to take into account what I call the Goldilocks factor, which is my themes are not too hard, which means, too narrow, too few things fit in it. And they're not too soft, which means they're too wide and too many things can fit in. I try to find the just right, that Goldilocks factor, so to speak. If a hard week, similarly, if a hard week means abandoning the whole framework, then there's not enough tolerance built into it. So we have to think about that. And that's why words are so important. I've talked about this in other videos. We did the whole 1 word a day playlist as well, which you can watch here on YouTube. All of that showcases why words are so important. So if you can find thematically multiple things that can fit inside a theme, then you're giving yourself enough tolerance there. That'd be a good example. The goal isn't a perfect week. There's no such thing as a perfect week. The goal is a week that you can return from. It's funny because, again, speaking of words, there's perfect and then there's perfect. And we focus too much on the one pronunciation when we should be looking more at the second pronunciation. So what does good enough actually look like in your system? Now, let's say if you let's say you're using daily themes or any kind of theming, time theming, and you honored it for, say, 60% of your week. Does that count? What counts? This is the kind of thing that you need to think about so that when things slip, you essentially have a clear bar for what's still in range versus what needs like a reset. So keep that in mind. Tolerance is really important. Now, how do you return without starting over? How do you return without starting over? So how do you get back to the system without having to throw the whole thing out and start all over again? Well, this is the move that I think a lot of people miss. In fact, most people miss it. And it's when the system breaks down, they treat it like a diet that they fell off, right? My book, The Productivity Diet, talks about diet, but not in the terms of like a crash diet or a limited diet. It's a ongoing diet, like a lifestyle. That's what this should be. And then what happens is when they fall off the diet, they restart from day one. New page, new plan, clean slate. But that's not a return. That's an erasure, right? And it means that when you do this, it means you lose all of the signal that led to the breakdown and that the breakdown was actually giving you. All of that feedback, all of that data that is really, really important, it's gone. So instead, really, you've got to come back to the smallest unit. I talk about this a lot too, is you often have projects that masquerade as tasks on your to-do list. And one of the things I suggest is you break your projects down until their smallest particles. And again, that's going to change over time too, because the better you get at something, the less particles you need. But break them down to their smallest particles, and then you can make forward progress. So you have to get things down to their smallest increment, their smallest unit, not the whole week in this instance, not the full theme, right? If you're using themes, you don't have to go right back to square one, just the next decision, really. This is probably where attention paths come in, right? Which is part of time crafting. So what's the one thing that reconnects you to your rhythm, cadence right now? So if things fall apart because you're exhausted, well, let me look at my low intensity tasks and see how I can get some momentum from there. Or I feel incredibly rushed and everything looks big and daunting. How many small tasks, 5-minute tasks, can I use to start building momentum? Or, no, the one thing I haven't done in a while is I haven't done any learning. All right, well, let me look at all my studying or researching or learning tasks that I have on my list, that attention path, the activity-based one in this case. And let's do at least one learning thing. It could be something very small. You could even say, I'm going to spend some time learning something, but I'm only going to spend 5 minutes, or I'm going to do some low intensity learning because I can do that right now. This is what I'm talking about. This is giving yourself grace, by the way. Giving yourself some grace. It makes the return possible without that shame that can show up, right? It says, you're allowed to be in process. You don't have to earn your way back. Just have to come back. The thing that sustains that is trust. So if you have a system that you trust and it's worked for you, you don't throw that out. It'd be the equivalent of being in a long-term relationship and you have a fight and you've been together for years, let's say, even let's say months, whatever, again, nuance, right? And you have a fight, and it's not a massive all-out fight. It's just a fight. It's an argument. And instead of trying to, instead of looking at the fact that you've built all this trust in the relationship, you just say, oh, that's it, I'm out. Again, there are circumstances where that might apply, but you're not necessarily going to do that for a fight about, who didn't put the dishes away. Especially if it's a one-time thing, right? Or if it's not a pattern that is not something that you can break. Again, it might be a ham-fisted example, but you could probably see what I'm getting to here. You've got to trust that your past self left you something to look at, these breadcrumbs, which you don't want to erase. You can also trust that your future self will know what to do with those breadcrumbs. And the system can support that, right? So trust that the system still, the one that you built, that it still holds, even when you stepped away from it. And you could have stepped far away from it, or you just sidestepped it a bit, but that trust is still there. You have to build that trust. That's really key. We'll get into that next time. The return doesn't require a perfect re-entry. It just requires a step. So let's talk about a move that can rebuild the momentum that you may have lost. And this really comes down to something you might have heard before from, one of my mentors, David Allen. The idea of, getting things done, David Allen. And he essentially borrowed this from Bruce Lee. Mind like water. Externalize the swirl. Before you touch the system, your daily themes, your attention pass, your calendar, whatever it is, get everything that's accumulated in your head out of it. You've got index cards. You've got voice memos. You're using generative AI. You've not cleaned it up. Maybe there's stuff there that needs to be taken care of. Scratch paper, whatever. Don't sort it. Don't judge it. Don't audit it. Don't edit it. Just surface it. And then this is the first practice, really, that shows how human you are. It's it's a representation of humanness. It's the fastest reset that's available to you too, because what it does is it does two things at once. Number one, it clears the mental noise. And then it also shows you what actually needs attention versus what's just been circling. You're externalizing the swirl. Once it's out, you can and should look at it. Triage it. And if you don't know what triage is, you should look it up, because triage is, basically sorting in a way that it will go to the place that needs the most attention and will get the best attention, the best care, right? Assign it to those themes if you've got them built. Decide what's real and also what's just been allowed. That is how you rebuild momentum. Not by forcing your way back into the system. That's not how you do it. But by creating the conditions for the system to work again. That's efficacy. We hear about efficiency all the time. We hear about effectiveness. That's the blend. That's efficacy. Create the conditions, not willing yourself through them. So you're creating those conditions and you're not willing yourself through them. So I'd love for you to chime in the comments if you're watching the replay of this. Tell me about a week that went sideways. Share about a week that went sideways. What broke down? Where'd you get stuck trying to come back? If you're listening to this podcast episode, answer that question. Here's 3 other questions that you can contemplate beyond the idea of what broke down. So think on these questions. 1, what's the thing that most reliably knocks your system off track? Number 2, do you tend to blame the system or blame yourself when things fall apart? And 3, what does starting over look like to you, and does it actually help? And sit with those questions. I recommend you answer all 3, but sit with them, pen and paper, or dictate them, talk them out. But really answer those questions. As we're recording this and sharing this, I posted something on my LinkedIn about the Hulk Hogan documentary that just came out. And ultimately, I always tend to find connective tissue that I can bring back to the writing and the creative work that I do. But the idea is that he kept doing this finishing move, his leg drop, year over year over year over year, thousands of times. And no wonder he ended up with back issues. Think of what you want about Hulk Hogan, and I absolutely get that. Not a great person as far as I'm concerned, but I'm talking about the character, and I'm talking about the toll. Remember, I grew up in the 80s, so watching pro wrestling, so there is an affinity I have to at least that character. But in the documentary, he actually says, I had these huge arms. Why was I doing a leg drop? I could have given a sleeper hold or something like that. But because he never asked that question of why am I doing this leg drop? And just kept doing it because it was working and it was the move and it was expected. He paid a price long term because he never sat with that question, the pause of why am I doing this? Does this make sense? What will the long-term effects of this be? I mean, Steve Cam and I talked about this yesterday on another live stream for another episode of the podcast. Mark Manson discussed this during the podcast episode as well. These are questions we don't often step back and ask and gain perspective on because we're so busy trying to check off boxes. We're so busy seeking answers to questions that are out there that we haven't actually thought about questions that aren't. So we're not even at the answer part of that. So these 3 questions, sit with them. Systems do not fail because they're bad. They pause because life happens. You wouldn't have put a system in place if it wasn't working for you at some vantage point, in some season, right? You've probably heard the phrase, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. That's what we're talking about here. The skill here isn't building a system that never breaks. That is a fool's errand. It's not going to happen. It's just really about building one that you can always find your way back to. I didn't build TimeCrafting in a day, and I certainly didn't apply what it is now all in a day. In fact, TimeCrafting existed as the Now Year formula and then the Now Year method, and now it's known as TimeCrafting. It took time to build. There's a new initiative I'm building right now that's in my upcoming book that started off as something else and is now going through the testing phases with a few select people to kind of be what it's become, evolve, see if it actually works. I actually think it's better than it was in its earliest iteration, just like I think TimeCrafting is better than it was in its earliest iterations. So there's a refinement here. TimeCrafting, we are crafting, right? Which I've alluded to in previous videos, podcasts, etc. So TimeCrafting is designed for this. It wasn't just designed as this, it was designed for this. So if you're interested in TimeCrafting, I encourage you to check out timecrafting.com. I'll put a link to the starter kit in the description as well if you're interested in getting the starter kit, which is a PDF. But everything is gone into far more deeply in my book, The Productivity Diet, which you can get wherever books are sold. And of course, we go from the productivity diet. Remember, diet being a lifestyle, not a crash diet, not something that you just set and try for a limited time and then, okay, I'm good now, let's stop. Which is more of a prescriptive book to my upcoming book, where I dive more deeply. And if you've read The Productivity Diet, I tease this, but this idea of shifting away from productivity, which I believe is broken, into this idea, the state of being productive. Productiveness, the precursor to productivity. That's what productiveness is about. It's not about the perfect week. TimeCrafting is not about the perfect week. Productiveness is not about the perfect week. Both are about the returnable one. Now, next time when we come back and we're doing this live stream on Wednesdays, is we're going to dive into the thing beneath the system. So I talked about the building and all that stuff. I'm going to pull back the curtain and share with you what sits behind the system. Okay? So the philosophy that shaped TimeCrafting from the very beginning. I've touched on it a little bit as we close out here. And I also want to share with you why I've spent the past few years not just writing the book, The Productivity Diet, where we go into it in detail, but also the book that is coming out later this year that kind of is more of the philosophical angle to it. So I'm looking forward to sharing that with you. I hope you'll join me on the live stream. I want to thank you very much for joining me. And until next time, remember, stop doing productive and start being productive. See you later.